Do better tapping in your dreams. Well, no, but I'll flip them.
Yeah, I'm gonna take that.
Yeah, they're on. We're good now. Okay.
Test. Hello. That is nice. Thanks. Dan went and, without being asked, picked me up this microphone. Yeah. I feel like doing a TED talk. All right. Let me go grab this chair. Well, thanks everyone for being back for part 2. And for those of you who were able to watch online, this microphone, which Dan picked up without me even asking, will help with being able to hear on Zoom, YouTube, all of those things. Did everyone get a handout? Everyone got one? Yes, okay. So this is week 2. Then we have another one on the 12th and the other one on the 26th. So let's just jump right in here. So as a reminder, last time was Ecotheology Seminar Part 1, which was the history of the region. A very abridged. Can you turn me down a little bit? Okay. Okay. I just don't want to, if I talk a little louder, I don't want to scare anyone. So I want to do a quick review of last time, which was a religious history of the region. And what I left with was this: whatever religion believes about its roles and responsibilities in relation to the earth has a profound impact on history and culture. So I did a rather simple or simplified overview of the indigenous folks who lived here versus the Puritan colonizers. And I wanted to just emphasize that the way they viewed the land in relation to their religion and spirituality affected the way they interacted with it. So I have here the indigenous honored the earth and its inhabitants as an expression of their religious belief. In other words, their religion informed how they would encounter the earth and its inhabitants. Similarly, the Puritan colonizers, Puritans, they exploited the earth and its inhabitants as an expression of their religious beliefs. Their convoluted Christianity, which we talked about, had the doctrine of discovery and the idea of enclosed private property, which was foreign to the folks who lived here, indigenous folks. That was their religious belief, and that informed the way they encountered the earth. Now, we're not there yet, but next week, next week, we're going to actually understand what is, hey, that's how they understood the earth. That's how they understood the earth. What is a biblical Christian view of ecotheology, a relationship to the land, plants, and animals? But we're not there yet. Today, I want to talk about the present spiritual context of Branford. Last time, we said, all right, what went on here centuries ago? This is a pretty, not only is this a historical area, it's a pretty historically aware area. We still have a lot of historical buildings, and we have, you go around to Northampton, you see a statue of this person, and we have cemeteries. So people are pretty aware of how history, specifically religious history, formed this region. But what is it now? What is the spiritual context of Branford today? It's not what it was 200 years ago. It wasn't what it was 50 years ago, right? There was a time when you went to church, I guess, right? Things like that. So let's first talk about religious identity. And basically, you see, your form is just going to follow along with me, and you can just see where I'm at, just so you can get a clue of where I'm at. So we're under number 2. We're going to look at religious identity. First, we're going to look at church attendance in the U.S. Historically speaking, religious identity played an essential role in the lives of American Christians. It was standard. 90-something% of people belonged to some religion. It was part of their life, and it was something that took up time in their life. It was something they identified with this. But studies show that people are increasingly trending in the opposite direction, meaning every year that goes by, fewer and fewer people identify as religious with a religion or with a certain organization. And according to a 2023 Gallup polling, said this: 45% of Americans say religion is very important in their life, with another 26 saying it's fairly important, and a 28% saying not very important, which is a huge drop from what it would have been not that long ago. And since Christianity is the dominant religion in the United States, any study on religion usually correlates with Christian church attendance, meaning when we're asking, typically in this region, how religious is this region? The answer to that is mostly going to be how many people go to Christian churches, for the most part. To quote Gallup again, the long-term decline in church attendance is linked to a drop in religious affiliations in general, particularly for Protestant religions, but also decreasing weekly attendance among U.S. Catholics. So, the move away from religious identity is pretty much less people going to Protestant churches, right? So that's kind of how these measurements work. It's most people who were historically part of Protestant congregations, which Protestant is virtually everything not Catholic, other than Eastern Orthodox, and Anglican. Episcopal is kind of arguably not Catholic or Protestant or both. Everything else, so we're talking Congregational, Methodist, Baptist, whatever, Evangelical, all under the branch of Protestant. That's the group that has disappeared from the pews. So, church attendance in the U.S. Let's move to post-Christian New England, because we're not just talking about the U.S. We want to talk specifically about the spiritual context of New England. Then we're going to move specifically to Branford. New England is considered the most post-Christian region in the United States. Now, post-Christian is a term that means a society that was formerly, big scare quotes here, a Christian society, whatever that meant. In other words, most people identified as Christians, and the Christian faith informed certain policies and practices of the culture at large, right? So if we look at the term post-Christian, this means a society that's post, that's beyond, that isn't a primarily Christian society anymore. You see that in Europe. They're kind of ahead of the U.S. in that. And then what you see in New England is leading the post-Christian numbers in the United States. And it's consistently trending away from institutional Christianity at a faster pace than most of the United States. And what's really interesting for that is then, so what you have when I talk about evangelical, I'm going to use that word a lot. Evangelical is a Christian movement, right? And you mostly see evangelical churches in the non-denominational, independent type churches, right? You think of a Shoreline Community Church, Vox Church, but even other churches could be considered. In some measure, there's evangelical elements in our congregation. Evangelical is a movement that is very much interested in reaching people, getting people saved, right? Reaching people with an evangelistic message. And it's very much about, asking Jesus to your heart, having a personal relationship with Jesus, and getting as many people as you can into, but evangelical movement's been completely hijacked by political conservatism, and it's not anything what it used to be. So the word has lost any good meaning. But you still have evangelical churches, and they're very much focused on Here's 100% what we believe to be true. Here's how you get right with God. Here's what you need to do. And it's kind of a very narrow, get as many people in as possible type mindset. Think of, well, here, let's just keep going. So, New England is post-Christian more than anyone else, meaning, so, quote unquote, supposedly this is the region that's moved away from Christianity and spirituality faster and further than any other place in the United States. And from the evangelical mindset, that missionary church planting mindset, this region where Christianity exploded a few centuries ago has become the mission field most needing the Christian faith. And I've heard this before in my time in Philadelphia, other places, is we should be sending missionaries to New England because this place has no Christianity, no spirituality. It's a spiritually cold place. I'm quoting, okay? C, evangelical mission field. So, according to Jared Wilson, he was writing for the magazine The Gospel Coalition. He said this, I am convinced that we need more gospel ministry in the Northeast, in New England in particular. In fact, I believe the need is urgent for replanting, revitalizing, and planting of new evangelical works. In terms of mission at home, I think the old grounds of New England are the new missional frontier. Located a mile from First Baptist Church of Branford is a multi-site mega church named Vox. Who knows about Vox Church? Of course, right, we know Vox. They have a big building there, that's their main site, but they have sites all over. Their literature, their main site's in Branford. If you look at their literature, it says this, with a population of 14.8 million, New England has fewer people attending church or reading the Bible than any other place in America. We live in the greatest mission field in the Western Hemisphere, and we believe that this is a season for spiritual awakening. All right? So the language around Christian identity is often conflated with evangelical church attendance. Therefore, the mission goal is to bring people back to attending evangelical churches to find spiritual awakening so the demographics will reflect a church attending evangelical identifying population. So I want to break that down. I know we just said a lot of words, but basically you have people not going to church at the same rate they used to. You have churches like Vox and others, and I'm not here to talk one way or another about Vox. This is me just giving you demographic research. You have churches like Vox say, this place is spiritually dead, it needs a spiritual awakening. Well, what's a spiritual awakening? Get people back into a church so that when they take the polls the next time, the numbers of people who attend evangelical churches goes up. It means there's been a spiritual awakening there. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, good. And whether we agree with that or not, that's just how this works. It's what you're going to see is I'm going to make the case just that is a narrow understanding of spiritual awakening, and that perhaps the best thing isn't getting people to just come to your church. Or building a church that pulls people in doesn't necessarily accomplish what it thinks it's accomplishing. But before we get there, the question we have to ask is, one, why has church attendance declined? Right? And are New Englanders just less spiritual than the rest of the country? Thank you. Right. But that's what you're going to hear from these sources, right? New Englanders are just less spiritual. And the question is always, why has church attendance declined? There's a number of reasons why church attendance has declined. But kind of the one bigger, broader one that's not just regional, but is kind of like almost global, at least Western world, that I want to look at is called new atheism. New atheism. So there are reasons why people didn't, but one of the contributors for at least one generation or one kind of people with a certain mindset pulled away from church in the last 30, maybe 40 years was a movement called New Atheism. So I want to talk about New Atheism for a little bit. So letter A, the movement. With the rise, now there's always been atheists. Atheists are people who just don't believe in God. There's always been people like that, usually a minority. And in most cultures, if you were an atheist, you were in big trouble, okay? You weren't allowed to be an atheist most of the time. But something shifted not that long ago. There was a rise of this modern intellectual movement. And again, where all the Ivy Leagues are. So there's this movement of intellectualism, education, being smart. And this was often pitted against religion, being dumb, right? And religious folks were as much to blame as the intellectual folks for basically saying science and religion can't mix, philosophy and religion can't mix, history and religion can't mix. So you had kind of this movement where if you were going to actually use your brain and go to school if you wanted to, read books, be taken seriously, you couldn't do that while still being a faithful religious person, right? And the same time, you had on the religious side, if you're really religious, science is the enemy, history is the enemy, philosophy is the enemy. And what you had then was this intellectual movement that would leave religion behind, but it wasn't like anything else because atheism became in vogue. Atheism, this was around when I was in undergrad, high school, atheism became cool. With celebrities, book tours, conferences, movies. For the first time in American history, atheism wasn't just tolerated, but it was the preferred option for intellectual and reasonable people. In the words of famed new atheist Richard Dawkins, he said this: the onus is on somebody who says, I want to believe in God, flying spaghetti monsters, fairies, or whatever it is. It's not up to us to disprove it. Right? So what set new atheism apart from older forms of atheism was the way it opposed religion and God in the same zeal and fervor as religious fundamentalists. So this movement, you had Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, all these guys who were in your face, making creative content, books, basically saying, not that, atheism's an option, but no, that religion is bad. Religion is the biggest cause of problems in the history of the world. If you really have a brain, if you really want to live a fulfilling life, drop it, leave it all behind. So what are the effects? Letter B. Writing for Christianity Today, Stephanie McDade, she recalls an event where this movement showed itself to be mainstream in the Western world, meaning atheism wasn't just some fringe thing, it was becoming the norm. She said this: I think a case can be made that faith is one of the world's greatest evils, comparable to smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate, Richard Dawkins said in 1996 to the American Humanist Association. 10 years later, in 2006, a Comres poll found that 42% of UK adults agreed with his statement. That is, 2 in 5 people were not just non-believers, but they all thought that belief in God should be deliberately snuffed out. Right? You tracking with me? Track with me, right? So for those captivated by the new atheist movement, the leaders had created a culture that made life without God reasonable, accessible, and fulfilling. That's stuff of the past. Religions cause nothing but problems. If you really have a brain, if you really are interested in living a fulfilling life, leave it all behind. And that movement, I don't know how many of you experienced, but that was very much something I had friends who were pastors, actually, who fully went there, right? Fully went there. And just when I was in college, it was really big. This is like early 2000s, for there to be like atheist Christian debates. right? That was like a common thing. You'd have Richard Dawkins debate someone else on this event and things like that. And atheism had this prominent thing, and you go in Barnes & Noble, Christopher Hitchens was dying, and his book on mortality, the book before he dies, was on bestsellers. I mean, this was normal stuff, atheism, right? What about the aftermath? See, despite what seemed like new atheism's irreversible grip on Western society, the denial of God, the afterlife, and spirituality would not have the final say, and new atheism would begin to lose its place as in the forefront of the American mind. And once again, New England demonstrates this change. Interesting. This movement, New Atheism, really started losing steam, and people started to come out of it, and we see that being led by New England. In late winter 21, in the thick of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Boston Globe published an article titled "Chaplains and the Rise of On-Demand Spiritual Support," demonstrating this very shift. According to the author, John Fitzgerald, still, when times are tough, like in a global pandemic, people look for comfort. David Rossmarin, leader of McLean Hospital Spirituality Mental Health Program in Belmont, said that requests for spiritual care were up 100% in the first 3 months of the pandemic alone, right? This movement towards chaplain care does not mean people are returning to church, organized religion, or even God as historically defined. Instead, in New England, where the influence of Puritan piety has yielded to unceremonious secularism, something more malleable is emerging. To meet spiritual needs when and where they arise, we're turning to chaplains, people trained to work outside of the structure of religious institutions. That's what you have. All of a sudden, the pandemic hits, and there are calls for chaplains everywhere. So chaplains are typically interfaith, meaning if I were to be a chaplain, I'm a Christian, or Protestant, I would show up to a Catholic prayer. You can it's pretty open in that way. They're getting these calls, and what they're learning is these people want spiritual care, but they're not necessarily interested in identifying with a religion, specifically not necessarily interested in going back to church, but they are interested in having spiritual needs met. And chaplains are an interesting thing because they're not actually pastors of churches. They're just kind of their own thing in a hospital. You can have a chaplain come be with you and you're not part of any religion. So it seems, starting in New England, this crawl out of this kind of secular, materialistic, cold, intellectual world that people imagined was happening everywhere, but especially New England. You see in New England, you see in Boston, this crawling out of people who are like, no, I am spiritual. I want spiritual care, but I don't want that. I'm not necessarily interested in equating spirituality to now I'm going to attend this new church in town or this old church in town. So if spirituality is back, if it's cool to be spiritual again, which it is, right, Sam? Sam's, younger guy. He'll tell you first. When I was younger, again, it was different. It was like cool to be atheist. I don't know how to explain it, but that's not true anymore if you talk to people. So where are people now? Where's this spiritual crowd now? We're going to look at the spiritual but not religious, or I just call SBNR. SBNR non-identity. So spiritual but not religious, their identity. So continuing the article I was just reading, Fitzgerald concludes, there is a growing need of chaplains for people who don't belong to a religion, often dubbed the nuns. Nuns, not Catholic nuns, N-U-N-S, but there is a new breed of chaplains who are distinctly ecumenical, and they are ministers for what's called the spiritual but not religious people. Okay? This growing population, the spiritual but not religious, more often finds a fulfilling and enchanting spiritual life outside of religious identity, garnering them the title nuns, N-O-N-E-S. Now, this term nuns originated from religious surveys where people ask, what is your religious identity? And you could pick, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or none. And more people were checking none. And what said, oh, no religious identity, must be an atheist, right? Must not be spiritual. And the reality is no. It's not rejecting spirituality, but they were rejecting a religious identity. Because for nuns, they find little benefit to specific dogmas, to specific doctrines, when they find value from various religious traditions or pursuing their own unencumbered path, mostly informed by their own experiences. So you have this group of people who very much say, oh no, I'm spiritual, but I don't fit any box that checked. I'm spiritual, but not religious, right? So what is SBNR spirituality? So back to what we said earlier, while evangelical sources decry the lack of spirituality in New England, a growing number of New Englanders would rebuff that statement that they need a spiritual awakening. Many would say, hey, just because I'm not going to your kind of church and you can't track me on a survey doesn't mean I'm not spiritual just because you're not going to have me in your attendance rolls or things like that. Instead, they see themselves as very spiritual people who see the world through the lens of an ancient and universal spirituality. In his book, Spiritual But Not Religious, by Robert Fuller, he says this, far from the kooky and self-absorbed people that they are often made out to be, America's unchurched spiritual seekers embrace a mature and dynamic set of beliefs. In fact, according to Pew Research, which is like Gallup polls, the Pew findings seem to debunk or at least complicate the idea that people who leave religion are hostile towards it. Furthermore, SBNRs are also differ from religious Americans on some key measures of belief and practice analyzed in this report. For example, SBNRs are far more likely than religious adults to say they believe in spirits or spiritual energies and that they can be contained in animals and other humans or in plants or mountains, rivers, or trees. So we have this group of people who says, I might not fit your mold, but I am religious. In fact, I believe you can find spirits, all over the place. And Barna makes a similar observation about SBNRs, concluding that their spiritual nourishment is found in more informal places, like yoga, meditation, silence, or solitude. But their most common spiritual practice is spending time in nature for reflection. Yeah, so let's think about this. We're told by many sources that this is a spiritually dead zone. And so we need exciting evangelical churches to show up and get people into church to give them a spiritual awakening. Now, there was atheism that grew here, but what we see now is there's a huge and broad spirituality that exists here, and it's mostly nature-based. And these aren't official religions. These are, go ask pretty much anyone who you see walking around on a Sunday. And then they're not in church. Many people are going to tell you something similar, right? That, oh no, there's a spirituality. I just don't necessarily feel like I'm going to ascribe to that spirituality. I don't need to. So the data demonstrates that the SBNR population of New England is not only spiritual, but finds spiritual meaning in the land on which they reside, which I find most beautifully ironic because it looks more and more like the indigenous spirituality. So what you have is this offspring, many of the Puritans, who came and had this cold view of land and earth and nature, kind of utilitarian view, wiped out these quote unquote heathens who were too close to land. And now what you have is this group of people saying, I'm not so interested maybe in attending church, but I really can see something going on in these trees and these rivers and in that fish and that bird that's really attractive. It's like, okay, interesting. So SBNR spiritual practices. So remember last time I read to you just something I wrote reflecting from my, so I have another one of those where I'm just going to read to you me walking through town or something like that. Yes, go ahead, Susan. Yes.
It seems to me, and I have nothing against, and I enjoy this myself, going out and walking around the green on a nice day like today.
Yes.
Enjoying the birds singing and the flowers and the trees and all of that. But if that becomes your spiritual focus or your religion even, and I would also include yoga and meditation in this, they're good for you.
Sure.
They're beneficial. But they're selfish. I mean, this is just something that you're doing only for yourself. And so to me, that would be the flaw in calling that type of thing a religion.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Susan says is this idea of the meditation, nature, things like that seem like very self-soothing practices, but not really religion. And I think, so that's where we're heading. And you're a step ahead. You're seeing it. No, you're okay. The question is, which we're going to get to, is, so what does this mean for a church looking at a neighborhood and saying, this churches see these people as non-spiritual and everything is spiritual, right? Up here, we talk about things up here. What if we've been understanding our own faith a little wrong in reference to the earth, the land, and plants, and that group actually has more in common than we think, right? And it reminds me of when Paul went through Athens in Acts, and he walked through and he just sees gods everywhere, all these statues. And he didn't go in and call them heathens. He went and said, wow, you are so religious. I can see you guys really take religion and God seriously. I see this God and that God. I have a lot of respect. I noticed one of your statues said, to the unknown God. And I have news for you. I know who that God is, so let me tell you about him. So you're exactly right, Susan. The just me and my hiking stick is a beautiful thing, but there's something missing there. And it says, do you know who made all of that? Do you know what so the case we're going to make, and I don't mind letting you in on it now, so it's quite all right, is that perhaps they've seen us wrong and we've seen them wrong, where they view us as people who live in a building and just care about spiritual stuff, and do we even care about what goes on in the trees and the earth and things like that? And the church has potential to look at people who aren't in church as just not spiritual, not religious, maybe atheists. So what we're going to come to at the end of this is, what does it look like for a church? And that's why next time we're going to talk about what is a Christian ecotheology. What is the best way for us to actually understand our relation to the earth, the land, the plants, and animals? Then will be followed by, all right, how can we now better reach our neighbors, be closer to God, be closer to each other, be closer to the earth and our neighbors, by actually sharing in a more authentic spirituality that in many ways is universal. it's kind of like, hey, you see, oh, I really love the way you're hiking, and I love what you're doing for the rivers, and I think it's great you love this tree. Do you want to know something more about that? And seeing that as a connecting point. Yeah.
I'm not sure where, we have a lot of young people who are very highly credentialed, and they are scientists, and they said they grew up in a church and they call themselves agnostics.
Agnostic, yeah.
And I don't know if they are SBNR or what, and they say, well, I've achieved a lot in my life. Yeah, I grew up in the church, but you know what? As a scientist, I don't know. Everything I've done is me. It's not God. And it's very sad. I've had this conversation. It's so sad to have this conversation. I don't know where to go with that. I'm like, really? You really think you've done this all by yourself?
It's amazing.
How do you go with? Where do you go with that?
Well, what I always think of this is like the early scientists were all Christians. I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't like, oh, let me pit science. It was like, wow, look what God made. How can we learn more about it? Let me get to the details, the bottom of it. So, and there still are scientists like that, though the atheism really, and agnosticism, which isn't, atheism says there is no God. Agnosticism says, I don't know anything. Who knows? So that is kind of the norm.
So many of them are.
Oh, yeah.
Was it Galileo who
Yeah.
was excommunicated for his belief in his astronomical?
Yes, yeah.
That didn't help
No.
the relationship between science and
It's true. The church over and over just would, at different levels, it was really the church's fault every step of the way to kind of separate from science. Yeah, Lise.
I was just thinking, and to Susan's point and what you were saying, that it seems like people are worshiping, and it says it in the Bible, they're worshiping God's creations rather than the Creator. And that's where I guess you bring it back to.
Absolutely. It's like if you are looking through a microscope, if you're looking at the human body, if you're looking through space, if you're looking at a leaf, if you're watching birds, you're right there. You're right there to see like God not only created this, but God is animating all this. Like God isn't just like zapped it and like is off somewhere. And it's like, no, it's all God holding all things together, animating. So you're like, you're almost worshiping, like you're almost there. You're almost seeing. Yeah. Let me read this final piece. SBNR Spiritual Practices. Branford, Connecticut offers a glimpse into this shift in New England and beyond. With a historically Swedish population, Tabor Evangelical Lutheran Church is nestled along the Branford River and backs up against a preserved forest. In recent years, the previously ignored section of forest and water has been the subject of numerous meetings and projects. The town has invested significant time and money to construct hiking trails, benches, and a modest parking lot. Central to the space is a massive labyrinth made from gravel. The entrance is marked with an engraved stone that reads, "Say yes to the universe." And another stone inscribed with the infinity symbol is at the center. At one time, Tabor Church was the destination of that area, but now hundreds of people pass the church every week to walk in the woods, observe frogs, birds, turtles, and coyotes, slowly pace the labyrinth, grounding themselves to the land, often leaving a tribute, a seashell or coin, at the center stone after completing the practice. Sunday mornings are perhaps the busiest time near Tabor Church. As for many residents, it's the closest thing they have to a day off. And it seems the spiritual significance of Sunday in New England drives Branford citizens to embrace the outdoors. Caddy corner from First Baptist Church sits two businesses that share the same walls and parking lot: Raven's Wing Yoga and Rock Garden. Raven's Wings keeps a busy schedule with retreats, events, and meditation practices. Rock Garden sells all kinds of gems, stones, crystals, and various items connected to New Age and land-based spiritual practices. For example, their homepage contains a picture of a box containing a Native American tarot deck and a book titled Medicine Cards: The Discovery of Power Through the Ways of Animals. Northward beyond First Baptist Church leads to another business named Avant-Garde Center for Wellness, which is, quote, a unique center that addresses the mind, body, and soul, offering holistic healing arts and wellness. Among the services offered at Avant-Garde are botanical medicine, shamanic practices, drum circles, energy work and energy healings, smudge ceremonies, and medicine card readings. Connected to the Wellness Center is Avant-Garde's boutique, where customers can purchase dream catchers, rain sticks, Native American artifacts, and wares related to spirit animals. Additionally, all boutique items sold help support charitable causes, including local animal shelters, Doctors Without Borders, and causes connected to saving the planet, women's rights, children's rights, and fair trade labor practices. In addition to labyrinth walks, smudge ceremonies, and Native American wares, another element of earth-based spirituality is on the rise in the form of psychedelics, also called sacred plants or plant medicine. Beyond what has historically been considered recreational drug use, there are initiatives in place to decolonize plants and make accessible the spiritual and spiritual and physical benefits of hallucinogens because, quote, some of the most widely used plant medicines, including magic mushrooms and ayahuasca, have long histories in the indigenous sacred ceremonies. Accordingly, the New England Sacred Plant Collective meets monthly to explore the historic, traditional, and emerging use of legal plant-based psychedelic medicine. All right. So did that give you a little bit of a tour of the spirituality, right, of Branford? It's blended, a little from here, a little from there. It's earth-based, land-based. It's kind of dabbles in indigenous and native stuff, some new age stuff, maybe some psychedelics, but at least some, what do you call them? What are the oils we use? Essential oils, things like that, right? And if you speak to a lot of people, millennials or younger, you're going to find very few who are hostile to God, who say there's no shot there's a spirit out there. Instead, they're going to say, maybe, maybe not, but I'm open to it. Or as they say, I'm here for it, right? And they're looking for any way to access that spirituality as possible. So I want to leave just with a couple questions. And the second two really aren't for us to try to answer today. But the first one is it, or how realistic is it for a spiritual seeker, a spiritual but not religious person to just show up on a Sunday at 10 and walk into church? Right. Okay. So it happens. It happens. It does happen.
I was very cynical, and I was just encouraged by a friend to come here. And I started to soak it up.
See, I did the opposite. I was here, and I left for 6 years. And it was in those 6 years that I think I gained a strong spirituality to bring it back in here and kind of combine everything together. Because I was out there all the time. I never stopped believing in God, but I also felt that I didn't quite need to be here to have God with me. like we've all come together. I mean, I feel more comfortable now than I've ever felt. And I went to church as a kid in the Catholic Church, even without my parents. I mean, I was always going to church. And then, for 6 years I wasn't, but I never felt adrift. It's kind of like I needed something to come back.
And even also, and, even with, I wouldn't say atheists, it's in the eyes. My brother, we grew up in the church. And now when you talk to him, he would say, oh, he believed in his ancestors and he believes in this spirit and that spirit. I mean, we don't argue with him. We just let him be. He's the baby brother, so you're not going to really beat him.
Yeah, just
But, the baby. But, so it's not just here. It's out there. And even touching back on when we were talking about the evangelicals in beating up New England. I mean, we're going to get a little political here. We're in blue state.
yeah.
In this area. So the evangelicals will do whatever they have to do.
Yes.
To try to suck us back in, because what? If you notice, the evangelical, anyway, they're in the red states.
Oh yeah. I mean,
So we're not taking part in their type of evangelistic belief.
well, yeah. Now it's
Through politics, so they're going to rate us that way, but I don't believe.
yeah, MAGA is now a religious point in evancelicism,
They
right? I mean,
have
it's
views, they write their papers, and I just believe that's what they're doing, just to make us look like, but I don't believe it.
No, absolutely. No, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's definitely a targeted effort to make blue states, but New England is the most hated, right? Where it's like they are just the most liberal, godless, blah, 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 blah.
They can't play no brains.
Yeah, and so there's this idea where so it's very easy to target that, and sadly the evangelical movement is more and more just a political movement that has churches there. And historically, talk evangelical historically, I mean, the evangelical movement was really just people who turned outward, and there were church people who said, let's go share the gospel with people out there. Let's go be, and so whether we're going to travel to the cities and preach, or we're going to go to the other side of the world and preach, it really was a movement based on reaching people, but it's been completely warped now as a political movement. And I don't think all evangelical churches realize that's happened, even on the inside, but there's still, as you said, this kind of attack on, New England has this low church attendance, so New England isn't spiritual. So on the reverse, so you're saying this southern state is spiritual because everyone goes to their church down there. Well, what does their church down there teach? Are they teaching the way of Jesus, or are they just reaffirming white supremacy or whatever? And so it's a terrible way to measure spirituality, because you're all of a sudden putting, this has the most people who attend churches, so they're more spiritual. And it's like, says who? What are these churches? So it's important. So what you have is these external groups, or even to come in and say, this is the mission field. We need to get them as church goers.
It's the easiest way to see people and make you feel guilty.
Yeah.
So they suck people in that way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think what some evangelical churches have in common with the current political climate is absolutism.
Yes.
Because in a lot of churches, the Bible, they don't see any contradictions in the Bible, and every word in the Bible is true and not open to interpretation of any kind. And that's pretty much the way the political climate is.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the messages that we're getting often from Washington. This is the way it's going to
There's no
be.
way or no way.
Yeah.
So maybe that's one reason why these movements feed each other.
It's exactly right. And Susan used the word absolutism. So in the same way within conservative politics, in conservative evangelical churches, everything is figured out. Everything's 100% dialed down. This is who's in, this is who's out. This is what you believe about this, this. This is what you don't believe about that. And therefore, everyone who goes to these other churches, they might not really be Christians because they don't have this. So the evangelical mind also pretty much doesn't see any other churches as legitimate. They might not say it, but for the most part, now listen, I grew up in the evangelical world. So for me, and it's not like people said this explicitly, but there was basically a sense of the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Episcopal, the this. I don't know if they're really Christians. I don't know if they really take the Bible seriously. I don't know if they're really, taking God seriously. And so there's skeptics whether if they really want to be on the right side, they would come to our church. So that's the kind of thing. So this is a godless, cold, not spiritual place, and we need to send churches up there, build churches up there, and get people in because even their churches are godless liberal institutions. I mean, that's what you hear is like, you're better off going to the movies than a mainline New England church.
I see this as an opportunity for Baptist churches because of our belief in soul freedom.
Yes.
So we offer more latitude
Yes.
than a lot of denominations.
Absolutely. It's a part of one of the Baptist distinctives is you have soul freedom, which other denominations tend to have a lot of top-down, this is what we believe, this about this. We do believe Orthodox, historic, Christian truths, but we also leave a lot of breathing room where one of the Baptist distinctives is soul freedom. In other words, each person comes before God and has their own ability to discern the Bible, to discern what God's telling them for themselves. As a community, we leave space to say, some people believe this about this, some believe this. That's okay. You'll hear me say that. You know what? There's 3 views that are kind of popular about this particular thing. You know what? Good Christians can believe all of them. And we leave space for that. And we tend to err on the side of being inclusive and welcoming than on the side of saying, you know what? I'm not sure about you. Yes, but
This whole thing about the atheism.
yes.
I grew up here in this
Yes.
place the whole time. It wasn't like anybody leaving the church to go in, or even like working out in the world. They weren't atheists. They weren't going to church because society made the change. They took the blue laws away. Sunday was open. Sunday you had to work. Sunday, but they didn't take God or my faith or anything out of you. They're still out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe they would go ahead and mark down on anything that they were atheists or class. And then we just need to go ahead and liven up that part of them that's there. It's the church that pulled away from them. It's not the Christian that came out. They're still there. It's still like my son when he went to school, went to college and everything. It's like they weren't atheists, and he actually went to a religion group while he was there and everything. But he won't say, that he wants to be a Baptist here at church. He'll come and he believes in. He says it's more like we just have to go ahead, and the Sermon on the Mount is his biggest thing. He just loves the word. If we all live by God's word that way, and we don't have that anymore because society took Sabbath away from us, really. So this part here where the atheist movement, I know I'm twice as old as you, and, I haven't, but I don't see that there was this atheist movement. I don't know.
Yeah, no.
What's really going on?
You're not wrong. So a lot of reasons you made some good points why people left church. So that certainly isn't the only one. I focused on the new atheist movement because of more of how it affects from the more intellectual, idealistic side of things. So I'm kind of focusing on what's going on in people's heads on a broader societal scale. So there was this sweeping, you look at this land, there was indigenous population, then there was this sweeping Puritan population, and then there was this Christian population, and slowly became less and less, and a lot of reasons for that, which Becky named a few, blue laws, things like that. But maybe in the more institutional place, if you're looking more at colleges and things like that, higher ed, atheism had this massive wave where you would have, where you've in the past would have had different speakers come to. A lot of universities would have Richard Dawkins come as their big conference speaker, right? Who was there teach, so these were huge rock stars as atheists. And so it might have been more prominent in colleges and high schools and things like that where you felt it. But it was a big movement, but it's not the only movement. But 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was a number of people who would have written atheist who aren't checking that anymore. But again, not the only reason at all. I just chose to focus on new atheism because of, well, a lot of reasons, but that's not the only reason. I could have brought up, there are other things, I could have brought up more reasons.
When you were quoting, it may have been Dawkins,
Yes.
making a statement that religion should be wiped out.
Yeah, snuffed out, yeah.
Snuffed out. I wonder how he thinks that would fit with the First Amendment.
It's a good question. I guess he is British though. Yeah, I mean, he's usually appealing to people. I don't know if just that. In his view, religion is the worst. And again, it caught some people who were kind of done and tired of church, being like, "Yeah, what is this all about?" But it fizzled out, and COVID, showed us. So the other questions I want us to just think about. We don't necessarily have answers. Can we expect SBNR people to walk to church? Some yes, some no. There are some people who are spiritual seekers who want to do that. Others may not even consider it. So it's just something to think about. What other ways are there to reach our neighbors?
I had a friend who came to church today, and she was texting me yesterday, and she said, will you be there? Yes, I will. And I told her I'd probably be up in the loft most of the time. She said, great, I really need a safe place. And I think that may be part of the reason some of the SBNR people will come, especially during this time. They may not believe in God, but they need a safe group to have their back.
Yeah, and I think that's what we'll see as we go on. It's how, and this is what we'll get to, is how can we make our space, we look at, all right, historically, what was land look like? How can we reimagine our parcel of land, our building, as places that are in between spaces for people, welcoming, safe places? We look at stuff we already have done outside. How do we just let the neighborhood and peoples know, like, hey, this is a safe spiritual community, and we do lots of things. Maybe you won't come to Sunday worship service right away, but hey, we're going to have meals. We're going to have whatever we do, little events here. We have our pollinator gardens. And we already have a lot of this stuff, but it's more of a communication and kind of thing. What does it look like for people to see? Oh, that First Baptist place is a place where they really have some beautiful land. They really care for the trees there. They got pollinator gardens. They do things like that. Maybe some other types of gardens that will go in. They have food there. They have a food pantry. This is a place where we can go and recognize, we're accepted. And we're a place that doesn't shove things down your throat, So that's kind of going to be the goal here. It's seeing how we can kind of get back to the roots and say, what is the way we understand our relationship to the land, plants, animals? How do we see God in those things? How do we relate to them? And showing the neighbors, hey, we have a great piece of land here. We have a great group of people here who probably share more values with you than you even realize. Come sit by a tree. Come pick a tomato. You know, whatever, things like that. So,
It's not like come and accept our joy.
yes,
The joy is what's doing it. It's not the building or the plants or anything. It's just the people and spreading out. You know, we're joyful about something, and it's our faith.
absolutely. And so these are the questions we'll look at. Well, so I don't want to answer this right now, but just something to think about. Why are large production churches having success? You can't lie. These larger production churches like a Vox do have people coming to them. Why? What are they doing well? What are they missing? Why does, or what does biblical Christianity have in common with the SBNR population? You know, maybe there is a lot more common ground than we realize. They might just be, you might say, you know what? I get it. I understand why you'd want to have a drum circle, and I understand why you'd want to go sit by the water on a Sunday. I understand all these things. You know, these make sense. And then how do we reimagine evangelism, which is reaching people with the gospel, in light of a biblical ecotheology and SBR spirituality? So next time, is that next week? Yeah, so next week we're going to overview of Christian ecotheology, which basically we're going to look at. My ecotheology is just land, plants, and animals. So it's going to be what does the Bible say about land? What does the Bible say about animals? What does it say about plants? And how might God be inviting us to relate to these elements of creation? And then after that, God's land, God's goals. And that's going to be more of us kind of imagining ways we can reach people and better encounter God with the space and the land we have. So that's it. Yeah, have a good one, guys.